life that I won't belongs to another.
Refer to myself as being older than dirt. I just by way of background, I think you should know a little bit about me. I became a Christian at age 38. I was a slow learner, and it was a game changer in my life. I had to hit the ground running and figure out what it meant to be a godly husband, a leader, and a godly man. All of that was totally new to me. Fortunately, a friend of mine was kind enough to invite me to a Bible study, and within a short period of time, I was one of the leaders in the Bible study. And I remember when they came to me and asked me, would you be a leader the next year? And I said, but I've only studied this 1 year. And, oh, sorry. He said, no, we think that you have the experience, and even though you may not have read the passage, we were doing a book. The first year we did Matthew, then we did Genesis. And so the rest, as they say, is history. From a career standpoint, I did, for you, commercial real estate and tax. That's not real exciting. Pretty boring, actually. I was good at it. I had clients who paid me a lot of money for my services. And I was a Christian lawyer, and I tried to make that not an oxymoron. And sometimes you have to be very careful with ethics and what you say in terms of in the office, and so I learned to demonstrate my faith in a way that wasn't offensive to people who didn't know me. The friend that I met with, Stacy Reinhardt, that he's talking about, we've been in a, you can call it a number of things, integrity group, accountability group, but we've met together as a peer mentoring group for a quarter of a century, 25 years, weekly. And over that span of time, we've been in and out of each other's lives. And we've seen our kids grow, graduate, get married, have children, parents die, the whole spectrum of life. And we've one another through that entire process. And when I retired, actually, it was a discussion point with both of those men of what I would do after retirement. And my heart said to be a volunteer with MentorLink. I didn't know what that meant. Well, I might be retired, but I'm busier than ever. When I occasionally do things like this and do some training, although this is not going to be a training session that we do per se, I'll travel some, but I do an institute, we can talk about this later, that's online. We do it on Skype. And one of my groups, the last group I had, has a group of pastors around the world. One of them is in Chennai, India. Two of them are in Lagos. One of them is in the Ukraine. And one of them is a Chinese person from the PRC that's now living in the United States. So a very broad background, very diverse. And yet we cover the same material. And what's really interesting as we go through the material, that the cultural view of that sometimes comes through. And it's really interesting to see how they sort of take a common theme, a common element, and yet sort of twist it to make it adopt for their particular culture. But I'm here to talk about mentoring, and I want to start this. By the way, the organization. Oh yeah, the other thing that I do besides that is worship team, which I started 3 years ago, and it's one of the big joys of my life. I wish I had started sooner than age 70. It's just a wonderful thing. And I also write a blog. One of the things that I've done is I study millennials. They are Gen Y. I also study Gen Z. These are the age kids who are now getting out of high school. And tomorrow I'll do a presentation on what makes them tick, what makes them different, and how to approach them, because it's very important. But I want to sort of step back and give a 30,000-foot view. The word mentor really doesn't appear in the Bible. It's not articulated, but it's demonstrated from beginning to end. We see examples of it all throughout Scripture. Jesus mentored the disciples. He didn't teach them. He didn't say, we are having class tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Bring your textbook and I'll give you a lecture. That's not how it worked. He walked with them. And most of his interaction was on the road, didn't occur in a synagogue. And I tell pastors, when we do these pastoral trainings, I said, I got news for you. Most of ministry doesn't take place within the walls of the church. It takes place outside. And so one of the things that I've seen recently is an effort by pastors to realize that the workplace matters. And what happens on Monday through Saturday is just as important, if not more important, than what happens on Sunday. Now, the church has it wrong in a number of ways. And someone asked me to sort of describe what is mentoring, and I said, well, let's just sort of put it this way. The Great Commission talks about make disciples of all nations. What the church has done is convert that into make members of all nations. They're more concerned about how many members they have in the church rather than the ones who have become disciples. And disciple making, unfortunately, has fallen by the wayside. And one of the keys to the millennials is mentoring. 80 to 90%, when I speak to a millennial audience, 80 to 90% want a mentor. But the mentor age people, most of you in this room, 2 to 5%. So you have a mismatch of a huge demand and a small supply. I hope this conference changes your attitude towards that. All right. I chose to begin with, all right, I got to figure out I chose to, when I talked about how mentoring is just described from beginning to end, I started with Exodus 18, the Jethro principles. Well, okay, I got it. Oh, yeah, put it back up. Sorry. Got it. All right, I always start with a picture, and there's a method to my madness because millennials are more graphically oriented than most older people. That's a picture of the space shuttle landing on a runway at night. And I use that picture as an illustration because if there weren't any runway lights, how would it land? And if you take that as an analogy, the older generation are the runway lights for the younger generation. All right, the goal. This is a quote by Jack Welch, who is CEO of General Electric, a large company. He said, before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is about growing others. So let's shift to Exodus 18. If you've got your Bibles, you're welcome to read along with me. The setting is that the scene is Moses has just led approximately 2 million Israelites out of Egypt, across the Red Sea. And just think about this, 2 million people, and they've had these disputes, and while they're in Egypt, none of them got resolved. So now he's got them in the Sinai, in the desert, and he has all these disputes, and he did what any leader normally does when he sees a problem. He steps up, takes it on his back, and solves it. So the background, by the way, we don't know a lot about Jethro. You know a little bit. In Exodus 1, it talks about Jethro, who is the priest of Midian. So we know he was a priest and therefore a leader. He was Moses' father-in-law. And that's important because he has a vested interest in seeing that his son-in-law succeeds. So we don't know what his relationship with God is, but in verse 11 or 12, it says, he acknowledges that I know that the Lord God is greater than all other gods. So whatever he's seen in Moses has gotten through to him. Now, in the first verse, Moses has learned everything word of mouth, and he decides to do a visit. And he's going to bring Moses' wife and 2 children. By the way, if you want Bible trivia, not many people know the name of Moses' wife. So that might be good. Her name is Zipporah. Yeah. And the 2 sons were Gershom and Eliezer. So if you want to get in Bible trivia and stump somebody, that's a question. Who was Moses' wife? So now the table is set for Jethro's visit. So when they come and meet, Moses bowed down and kissed him. And that's a picture of respect of a younger man with an older man giving respect, and that's necessary in a mentoring relationship. If you're going to be a mentor, if you don't have the respect of your mentee, you can forget about it. You will go nowheres. So then Moses recounted to Jethro all that the Lord had done, and he shows humility. It's not what I did, it's what God did through me. All right, then so the day passes, and the next day, in Exodus 13, Moses takes his seat and serves as judge of the people from morning till night. And Jethro's reaction, I could make this in sort of contemporary language, was, "Yo, Mo, what are you doing?" He says, "What is this you're doing for the people? Why are you alone doing it? All these people are standing around from morning to evening, and the bottom line is, this is crazy. What are you doing?" And Moses, like all leaders, got defensive. And he said, "I'm doing this because the people asked me to. What else?" So whenever they have a dispute, they bring it to me, and I decide, and I inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Jethro, having none of it, says, "The work is too much for you. You're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear them out. Teach your people God's decrees." And sometimes people skip over that passage. But what he says is, you have these people, they may not understand how to behave. You need to teach them. And secondly, you are to continue as God's representative, but you need to enlist people. You need to select God-fearing men who are trustworthy and not after own personal gain, to serve as officials, as the judges, as it were, over the thousands, the hundreds, the 50s, and the tens. And he said, keep the difficult cases for you, but let them share the load. Here's an interesting thing. As a lawyer, it's interesting. I never could quite figure out how you know what is a difficult case and what's not a difficult case. In most court systems in the United States, difficulty is often determined by how much is involved. So a case involving a small amount of money goes to one judge. Case involving a middle amount of money goes to another court. And a case involving a lot of money goes yet to another court. So I'm not sure what difficult is. It may or may not have anything to do with value. So what was Moses' response? Well, there's a lot of things Moses could have said, a lot of ways he could react. He could have rejected it and said, nah, I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing. Or he could embrace it. And Moses chose well, in my opinion. He said, Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything that he said. He chose capable men, trained them, and made them leaders of the people over the thousands, the hundreds, and the 50s, and the tens. Uh-oh. Now, that's the story. From that, I pull 4 principles that apply both to mentoring and to life itself, and for pastors, for elders, what have you. The first principle is that every Moses has a blind spot. And a blind spot is something you can't see, or you choose to ignore it. In Moses' case, he chose to ignore. What he was doing was totally inefficient. You're all Moses. I'm a Moses. You have blind spots. We all do. Interesting enough, I think without Jethro, Moses would probably still be in the desert adjudicating disputes today. There was enough of them. Okay, so the first principle is every Moses has a blind spot. The second principle, every Moses needs a Jethro. If you're a Moses, you need a Jethro. If you're a Jethro, who is your Moses? Even the leader of a nation needs a Jethro to speak into his life. Someone who is older and more experienced and can give a perspective that he doesn't have. That's what mentoring is. Very simple, not complicated. Third principle. First one is a blind spot. Second one is every Moses needs a Jethro. Third one is every Moses needs to listen to Jethro or a Jethro. Jethro spoke the hard truth. That's what mentors do. They're not to hold back. It doesn't do any good to hold back. And Moses immediately put his advice to work. By the way, it's an interesting footnote. In setting up that court system of the thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s, that same structure is the basis of the Israeli courts today. It's never changed. Still exists. All right, principle number 1, every Moses has a blind spot. Principle number 2, every Moses needs a Jethro. Principle number 3, every Moses needs to listen to a Jethro. And principle number 4, delegation is hard, particularly for you pastors out here. Well, I find when we do our presentations, this question comes up a lot by pastors. They tend to be the Moses. A problem comes up, they take it, they do it, and they keep doing it. And they don't step back and say, is this the best thing for me to be doing? Is there someone else who could do it? Can I delegate this? Can I teach someone? There's some effort taken. And understand, delegation, I think, is unnatural. To me, in my career, I had to delegate, and it's a process. Nobody gets it perfect out of the box. Delegation, to me, basically means you're taking something that you can do better, faster, and more efficiently and give it to somebody else to do. And they're going to do it less fast, less efficient, and probably not as well. But if they don't do it, they'll never learn. And to the extent that the pastor doesn't delegate, he becomes a choke point. Things don't happen. People get unhappy. So the final thought here is, no man will make a great leader who wants to do it all himself or to get all the credit for doing it. That's what a great leader is. That's from Andrew Carnegie. He was one of the industrialists in the late 1800s, early 1900s in the U.S., and ended up being one of the greatest philanthropists known in American culture. Jethro's values are consistent with what we have in MentorLink. This is one of our principles that we have in what we call passing it on. It's our basic presentation. And it says multiplying leadership. In other words, making more leaders through mentoring of gifted reproducing leaders. The point of mentoring, by the way, is not just to help the person become the best that he can be, but to encourage him to do the same to the next generation, to somebody, pass it on. Let me give you some how exponential it works. In your lifetime, you will meet 10,000 people on average. It's impossible for you to have an impact on those 10,000 people. Can't do it. But if you take 10 people and focus on them, and they take 10 people, and they take 10 people, in 3 generations, you will have impacted 800 million people. Remember that illustration, because you often think, why am I just spending time with 1, 2, 5, or 10 people? And the answer is, it's a multiplier. It's a multiplier. And that's where the church has gotten it wrong. They forget that it's a multiplier. So anyhow, we get back to this, a mentoring of gifted reproducing leaders whose heart's desire and commitment is to humbly and strategically expand God's kingdom. You expand God's kingdom by pouring your life into someone else, just as Jesus did in his disciples. Not mess this up. We have something called the Leaders Covenant. By the way, all these materials are online at our website, so I don't do it. But basically, one of the things that we ask leaders to do, there's 10 covenants we do, is to have a prayer of 10 different commitments, and this is one of them. It says, I ask for grace and insight to intentionally, not accidentally, intentionally equip saints and strengthen the hearts and minds of young leaders. That's mentoring. That's what it's all about. So, 4 takeaway question. What's your blind spot? Do you know? Do you have a Jethro? Who's your Jethro? If you have a Jethro, he's likely to tell you that you have a blind spot. He might say, you need a course correction here because you're going to go off a cliff. And if you're a Jethro, who's your Moses? There's plenty of Jethros out here. You need to be looking for Moses. If you have a Jethro, are you listening to their advice? And fourthly, have you developed the skill to delegate to others? As I've said, it's not easy. And after a career of 45 years in a large international law firm, we had 17 offices and 600 lawyers. I can tell you that delegation is harder than you would think. But it can be done, and it needs to be done to make you effective. Thank you so much.